Okay, it looks like we are live. I'm Alan Steinfeld for Portal to Ascension and New Realities here with my very good friend Adam Apollo, who is, I would say, he is a sort of historian. He's sort of not just an earth historian, but he's a historian for lineages and cosmic families coming in and the interface between human genetics and extraterrestrial or ultra terrestrial genetics, and also the kind of mythologies. I don't mean mythologies in terms of making up, but mythologies in the sense that what informs us, what are the myths that we live by, and what are the ones we're not even aware of that's affecting us. So Adam, thanks so much for being here. And let's talk about what you're going to come to Glastonbury, which is a fantastic gathering of people in September. Go to portal2.org to find that out. And you're going to be there talking, at least in the post workshop, on dragon lineages and the unified field of consciousness. So now, for people who aren't familiar with Glastonbury, and what's the reality of a dragon lineage, and what do you mean by dragon lineages?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of really, great resources and books out there that cover some of the key insights about how important dragons have been in different cultures and traditions throughout history. One of the most famous is Return of the Serpents of Wisdom, which many of you out there have probably read. And I recommend these kinds of materials because they give a little bit of a different frame than what we're commonly used to getting in our academic, scientific world and in the general historical world, which just says all these beings are myths. We made them up and we came up with an idea of, this or that dragon to represent the foe or the enemy that has to be overtaken, which is the very common mythological frame in Western traditions. Or if you go to Eastern traditions, you get the exact opposite, that the dragons are spirits of luck and fortune and destiny. And when they show up, great things will happen for your life and or for the empire, as it used to be in the imperial portions of China and elsewhere. And so we've got this interesting frame that's been given us, but it doesn't really represent the totality of experience that people have had with dragons. And it doesn't really represent a lot of the deeper core narratives that a lot of cultures have shared about dragons for a very, very long time. And so when I get into this topic of dragon lineage, what I'm actually interested in is who are the dragons? What are dragons? How are we connected to them? And what role does that play in our history as beings, as a people? And in order to dig into this, I had to do my own personal deep excavation of work into this area. Since I was a very young child, had different strange visions of dragons, and my first drawings, I included dragons. My first painting that I really ever did with acrylic paint was a dragon head. And when I created my first stencil when I was in high school, and by that time I had just started waking up and experiencing myself connected to energies, fire, air, earth, water, and spirit, first and foremost, I created a stencil. And as I'm just weaving the elements in it, I realize I'm creating a dragon who's weaving all the elements. And those are just a few of countless hundreds and hundreds of synchronicities and moments with dragons throughout my life. And eventually, I got really curious. I had a sense that there was a symbolic or an archetypal connection to dragons that I had, that many of my past life memories involved the symbol of the dragon, the archetypes of the dragon. And I just couldn't shake it, And of course, as we go through periods of growth, we also come up against judgment and cancellation and other people's perspectives on these things. And of course, I became aware of the perspective that Christianity held for a long time, which is that dragons represent the devil and are evil. And it wasn't until after I'd really pulled that thread and began to realize that the entire ways and cultures of my ancestry, my people, the Irish people, the Tuatha De Danann, the ancient Celtic peoples, if you go back far enough, you come to the Tuatha, we're a people of the dragon. And that the ways of life of my people essentially had been made evil and been decimated by the Roman Empire first coming through, and then by Roman Catholic Church, and then later by other kinds of Christian churches. And I started to more than just question the idea that such symbols could just be good or evil. I mean, in fact, if the thing that you consider is good is the thing that's slaughtering and killing people and eradicating their culture, then what is evil in that case? And a lot of these things started flipping themselves on their heads for me throughout my journey, until finally I was going through a really deep and profound healing experience with a good friend of mine named Caitlin Naramore. And suddenly I had a full visceral flashback of seeing this pulsing field that was rhythmically pulsing and resonating. And there was light in a form of sort of a triforce form. Some people have seen my symbol out there, and it was similar to that, but it had these veins, almost like electrical veins of light moving through and around it. And I'm just seeing this image, and then all of a sudden it starts cracking open and light starts pouring through this vision that I'm having. And the next thing I know, I'm blinded by this light coming through this field, and these two heads come down and look at me. And my heart explodes with love. My eyes explode with tears. I'm instantly bawling, and I'm having an experience of love with a mother and a father dragon.
Mm.
And for the first time in my life, I realized I had been a dragon in the physical form, born out of an egg. I was coming out of an egg that was the pulsing veins. And it was so visceral, so deeply impactful in its emotion, in its feeling, in the healing experience that I felt when I had this moment, that it changed and shifted everything for me around dragons from then on, because I suddenly got the picture that this was not just about some mythological thing, that in fact, my soul and perhaps many souls, and of course, I ended up finding after that, hundreds of other dragons around the world, and people that are quite certain that they've been dragons and had memories as dragons and have experienced this kind of thing. And I mean, I could name handfuls of them: Kaya, Shayna, Cog, Justice, Aaron, Renee, Finch, Harlan, Jack, Shiloh, Daniel, Augustina, Leandra, Anna Bliss, Carrie, Rael, Caitlin, Ashwawe, Phoenix, Greg, Shayna, Dakini, and I can go on and on.
Mm-hmm.
And these are all beloveds of mine who came into an awareness that a part of them is a dragon. And they all have interesting qualities in common. All these people are in many ways stewards and guardians and leaders, and they are the kinds of people who just cut through the noise and the nonsense in their search to stand for the truth. And so that's a little bit of an intro, Alan, and I'm happy to have you come back in and we can just have a conversation about this, but I wanted to share that story as a little foundation for this.
I very much appreciate that, and the sincerity in which I feel your connection to that lineage. So is a dragon an S, because they don't seem to be around too much in the physical form, but are they an aspect of the metaphysics of our soul that just kind of went interdimensional? Would you call it that? Or where
I
are
would
they?
say that there are worlds where there are full physical living dragons.
Mhm.
And one of them that I was able to trace back to is actually a world in the Andromeda galaxy. And it took me a long time to figure that one out and understand that, because when something's in another galaxy, it's not even very easy to reference, because you can barely even see galaxies in the sky unless you have a telescope or binocular. So you can't just name that star. You know what I mean? But since I've found other planets in our galaxy where there are physical dragons and those beings are present, and but the vast majority of dragon experiences I think most people tend to have are with dragons that exist and live on the astral plane, and that are in close connection with the lands here on this planet and in other worlds, who are guardians and caretakers, souls that have chosen to be with the devas of the lands, as the ancient peoples would say, the devas being the living conscious life force of an area of land, and to help guard and protect that land and to be stewards of it.
Right. I mean, there seems to be, well, first of all, we're in the year of the dragon, if you look at the Chinese
We are.
astrology. And dragons seem to be present from China to the British Isles. And when you said that dragons were a symbol of the Irish people, there's that very famous English statue of St. George killing the dragon. Do you think that was a domination that the English wanted over the Irish and the rest of the Celtic people? Is that what?
Well, I mean, at the very least, we can draw a direct parallel between the behavior of the English with the Irish, Welsh, and Scottish people, to the sense of, we are the civilized good knights of the world, and thou shalt perish under our axe, or our spear.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, the reality of that situation is quite the opposite. What we know is that the English continued to rape women across Ireland and Wales and Scotland, to steal land, to claim ownership of land that was never theirs to begin with. It's the same colonization story that we see repeated by a lot of the Brits, unfortunately, across a lot of the world. Um,
Yeah. Well,
and so, yes, the peoples of Ireland and Scotland and Wales, and Wales still bears the dragon as the symbol on their flag. And if
I didn't
you
know that. Well,
absolutely
just the
there's a flag,
interesting karma of the English, not that we have to put that, I mean, some great people, of course, came out of England,
of
but
course.
the best writers in English were all Irish. James Joyce,
Mm,
William Butler Yeats, Samuel
mm,
Beckett. These were all, the great voices of
yeah,
English literature, and they happen to be Irish. So that's a separate thing. So I just
yeah,
wanted to throw that because I love literature. And
wonderful.
so also one more thing, in the Garden of Eden, I know that's a story.
Mm,
The the serpent, I think, was a dragon because after Adam and Eve ate the apple, the God said, "You'll now have to crawl on your belly," which means that when
mm,
the serpent or whatever it was, and I know it's a mythology, but it represents wisdom. I mean,
mhm,
and represents a wisdom that defies a kind of authority, like
mhm,
find wisdom for ourselves, which I think,
mhm,
in a sense, the dragon is the freedom to transcend. It flies, it breathes fire. I mean, I don't know which level of dragon you're talking about, but
mhm.
it's a whole other level of being. So,
Yes.
which level of dragon, when you visualize it or refer to it, what are you actually seeing and feeling in your own mind as you connect with that?
Yeah, well, I mean, there are different kinds of dragons.
Yeah.
So it depends on what kind of dragon I'm connecting to. There's,
Okay.
a lot of the dragons of the land, the guardians of the land, they can vastly range in size and shape. and everything from, you know, the serpentine dragons that are popular in a lot of Japanese, Chinese, and Taoist mythologies around the Orient, to, you know, the sort of legged, winged, four-legged Celtic dragon styles, to more of the kind of T-Rex style dragons with the bigger back legs and smaller front legs with wings and that kind of thing. So they have many, many different kinds of forms. And the thing about the astral is that it's very, very susceptible to projection and to internal mental reflection, because it's the mental plane. So
Right.
there's things that can show themselves to you on the astral, but it takes a lot of development to be able to see and receive something on the astral as it actually is, as it is imprinting itself to you. And in order to, I think, do that more clearly, we need to have deeper knowledge or reference and ability to have the bandwidth to see and actually understand what we're seeing. And so, you know, I fortunately, when I was in middle school, I was playing games called Dungeons and Dragons with some of my friends. And inside the monsters manual of Dungeons and Dragons, there's like 100 different kinds of dragons listed.
Wow.
And in years later, you know, I started really wondering, I was like, where did where did all these people come up with all these dragons? And, you know, you imagine a person, a writer, you're into literary works, and me too, absolutely. And I did this with Tolkien in high school. The question is, where did he get these epic stories? And when I did this research project on Tolkien, I found out he was a linguist. He wasn't even an author. He was into creating a new language that was essentially the Elven language. And he began having visions and dreams and experiences of the beings, the people that spoke that language. That was the only way he could make a real working, speakable language, was to know the culture behind it. And so Tolkien, in his own words, would say his stories were not made up. He was translating as best he could stories from fragments of another civilization somewhere else out there. This is what he really thought. And I think that most of the great myths that we create, stories we create, movies we create, they have threads of truth when they touch so many of us here on the planet, because we know that there's truth in them, and they are tapping into that truth in that place where they're sitting going, what kind of dragons are there? You know, and they're meditating on that and thinking about that, and then doing art to express it and to bring it through. So I had a library of dragons inside of me, which made it a lot easier to understand different types of dragons and some of their different roles and cultures. But it was really not until I had the direct visceral experience of being a dragon and began to remember being with dragons on another planet, my friends being dragons, that I started to actually really see their physical form clearly, and their power to basically weave the elements with their body, with their breath, their movements, to be able to weave the elements. And I think this is what became the stories of dragons breathing fire, because it's much more than just the breath of fire. It's the breath of life force, of the elements themselves that the dragons can harness.
Well, that's what I really want to get to in this conversation,
Right.
because now that you've defined it, what is the practical use? Because we're in the dragon year, so we can access those energies on whatever level with more power than we can in other years that aren't that kind of archetypal energies. So you'll be talking about the unified field of consciousness and the dragon. So how do we work with the dragon energies and access it and benefit ourselves and each other with that energy?
Yeah. Well, you know, as I said before, dragons are powerful guardians. So if you're feeling a connection to the dragon in your life, I recommend playing with that, opening up to that, seeing who is that being and what is that being here for. And for me, I have two dragon guides, and I actually found them when I was in high school, when I still thought dragons were either just astral or archetypal beings. And these two dragon guides have massively supported me on so many occasions where I needed extra help to deal with intense energetics in a situation or violent situations, and calling on them to be with me. I felt the energetic force of support that they could bring and the power that they could bring to a situation. Now, life is full of lots of challenging situations of different kinds. So to get into the specifics of practical application of that probably would be a whole retreat by itself, really, to get into all the ways that you could essentially practically leverage this connection. But the most important thing is that deep bond in yourself with that archetype, that being, or potentially that part of you that may be a dragon that's been seeking its way into expression. Now, Glastonbury is a really interesting place to have as sort of the center point of our conversations around this, because if we loop back around to that time and why Glastonbury is famous, one of the things that Glastonbury is pointed towards for is the wisdom and the mythologies and histories, so-called, of Avalon. And the reality is that if we look at Glastonbury, we see that it really was strongly developed all the way to the tower on the Tor by Christianity. And if you look at the traditions of the magical peoples, in other words, the priests and priestesses, i.e. the druids, i.e. the magical traditional indigenous-ish people of those lands, that's what the forge of Avalon's circle would have been based upon. It's not a Christian circle of priestesses. It is a circle of magi, of, as the Christians would call, witches, right? And so that Avalon itself was not Christian at all. But the time period in which the, as some say, the historicity of the Round Table and Avalon come into play, when we look at that period, which is around the 500s, what we see is a huge amount of conflict between Christian groups and lords and, castles and, guys from different areas all standing kind of in a little bit different stance, sometimes a political stance, sometimes a religious stance, trying to get their point across, trying to get their thing made. And what you begin to see as you untangle the knots around Avalon is that you have this people who were the people of the dragon, who worship the land, the connection, the sacredness of all life, who were the bearers potentially of these ancient tools, like the sword of light of Nuada, passed down over thousands and thousands of years from a people that potentially came on starships and landed on the Iron Mountain. I mean, they were said to have arrived riding clouds, right? And they bring with them also not just this sword of light that you could only hold if you were in integrity, otherwise it would just, shake out of your hand. Also this cauldron, this great cauldron of the Dagda. And the cauldron of the Dagda was said to be a great bowl that could feed an army forever. In other words, it had some ability to replicate food or whatever inside of it, generate energy and food and feed people. Now, that becomes really interesting when you start looking at these crossovers with Christianity, because this here is a bowl that gives life forever. And you have this association with a cup, a grail, and the cauldron of the Dagda was later called a grail or a chalice. And the traditions of the Druidic peoples that were passed down to Avalon would have said sword and chalice, staff and stone. These are the sacred ways of our people. And so you've got the sword of light of Nuada, the chalice or the cauldron of the Dagda, and there you have Christianity saying that's the Holy Grail. And you've got the spear of Lug, which essentially was a spear you could take into battle and not lose. And you have Christianity retranslate that and call that the spear of destiny, as it pierced Jesus's body. It gave it special powers, right? But the roots of these legends are not Christian at all. They're way before that. They go way back before the time of Christianity. And they're actually the roots of the tarot symbols, swords, cups, staves, stones, i.e. pentacles, right? And so we can see these magical traditions there. And I'll tell you, I've probably 7 books about the true history of Arthur that I've collected over the years, trying to find, just basically trying to find confirmation, and if these guys have actually found what I know to be true. And every single one of the books starts with a completely false assumption. That assumption is that Arthur was Christian. That's it.
Oh, really?
Every single one of them goes on the wrong trail because they're looking for a Christian guy who would have fought in battles and served in churches as a Christian. And there is no way that the priestesses of Avalon would have rose a being to leadership that was Christian. That person would have had to know the ancient ways and the magic of the old ways, and been a leader and a stakeholder for the survival of the sacred traditions of those peoples. Now, at a certain point, with enough conflict going on in the region, there has to be peacemaking. So if you can make peace by bridging the wisdom of the dragon with the wisdom of the Holy Grail, and sort of take some of the Christian legends and weave them together and just make it work, that they can be together, and that it's okay that we perhaps honor the chalice as the divine feminine goddess. Well, you call that the Holy Spirit. Okay, great. You know, we can be at peace with each other. And I believe that that's what was attempted, is that there was attempted to be a great peacemaking with Christianity and the time of Avalon. But the churches and all the peoples, the guys that were literally the monks, that were the scribes and taking down records, I think tried to eradicate the real records of what actually happened, and to retell that story as Christianity, which is the oldest story in the book of how you take a culture and then you make it yours. You reframe it as though Arthur was a Christian hero, and suddenly now more people want to be part of Christianity. And that's exactly what happened across the British Isles.
So you're saying the story of Arthur, King Arthur, is pre-Christian in its origins?
No, I'm saying the story is about sword and chalice, staff and stone, the Holy Grail, the cauldron of the Dagda. That's thousands of years BC. The spear of Lug, the stone of Fall, the sword of light of Nuada. No one knows how old those stories are. They go back to the earliest Celtic poetry in ancient Irish, which is pre-Gaelic. So we're talking thousands and thousands of years BC potentially. And yet the tales about these tools they then show up in Christianity at some point. And I think the juncture where they show up, and or where there's this crossover, is in this art of peacemaking that was happening during the time of Avalon and the time of Archer Undergone.
Well, I think you make some great points, because obviously if you look at the tour, and I was just there last year, it seemed like an artificial mound. It seemed like it's the same sort of style as Silbury Hill, which they have proved was artificial. So they were these mound builders, and there was probably a church at one point that the steeple is just the remains of, and that's probably thousands, at least 1,000 or more years old, and they probably kept building, because mounds, were power. Were power forces. Any place there was a mound, like, I know it's a little off the subject, but all the early U.S. presidents lived on mounds. Mount Vernon, Monticello. There's a whole story of the first 5 presidents had mounds, because mound and political power and fertilized crop all work together for
Mm.
empowering the individual. So there's
Mhm.
something about that the ancients, Celtics, knew
Mhm.
whoever built mounds, even in the North America, were
Mhm.
aware of the power of the earth to increase political and maybe even spiritual power. So
That's right.
there's
And Glastonbury there is no doubt it is a power center. You can tell because of the chalice well, you can tell because of the energetics there, and because the true history and the locations of these events that occurred, 1500 years ago are essentially lost. There have been places where the last remnants of that wisdom was aggregated. And I think Glastonbury is one of those places, which is why when you go there, you'll feel things and you'll see things. And our tours, I'm sure, will be beautiful and amazing. I just also have to be a stand for the historical truth as well as the truth of my experience and that of many of my soul family that I've been with, which would say that Glastonbury is not the hub of Avalon at all, but it is a place that has become one of the last bastions that you can still connect into that energy. And my goal is to, take people eventually to the actual lake where these events occurred, as they say, the lady of the lake was, and where some of these things happened, where the priestesses of Avalon worked with the Andragon family and helped to cultivate this new form of kingdom and leadership, essentially, which was completely decentralized. It didn't have a king. It didn't have a one point, which is why there is no record of a king who was this person Arthur. There's no record of that because there wasn't a king. It was a circle. It was a kingdom forged of leaders of different families and tribes from all over the region working together to be able to face the challenges of the onslaughts of Christianity coming up from the south and the very, very savage Vikings who would come down on ships from the north and roll through and burn villages and, kill and murder and pillage. And so there was a real pincher on the peoples of those lands at that time. Not only was it difficult for them to unify, but once they unified, to hold out against all of these forces. Essentially, you've got a political move that's making all your belief systems evil through a popular religion going on at the same time as you've got Vikings coming in and raiding and murdering and slaughtering your people. I mean, talk about a tough time to be alive.
Yeah, if we go back a little bit even further, where are the stone circles from? Where is the Avebury circle? I mean, that's so ancient. That's
Yes.
can you touch upon that a little? Because Glastonbury is not far from some of those stone circles, and we'll be
Absolutely.
visiting.
Well, I mean, if you keep going back and you go to the time of the Tuatha De Danann, which again is not a clear historical point, at the time of the Tuatha De Danann, it's pretty clear that some of these stone circles already existed. And it's not very obvious when or how a lot of these sites were built. The historical, evidence for a lot of the sites is highly, highly controversial. It's challenged all over the place. And if you go with some of the work of people like, Andrew Collins, for example, he's just recently found there's a whole dodecahedral geometric configuration hidden inside the geometry of Stonehenge, which is a new revelation, which is quite powerful. And I would say is probably right on track, because if you go back to the ancient wisdom traditions being carried through from the time of the Tuatha De Danann and before, a lot of the magic symbolism orbits around the five-pointed star. And a dodecahedron, for those of you not familiar with that geometry, is basically 12 five-pointed stars forming a perfect, circular object. And essentially, I've got a little dice form version of it on my desk, but it's not that obvious or big enough to show you. But essentially, if you took the physics work of Dan Winter, what you find is that if you create a phi ratio spiral that comes off of each of the points in that structure towards the center, the phi spirals actually spiral into an infinitely converging point in the very center. And in my work in physics on the proton, the geometric modeling of the quantum gravitational structure of a proton goes to a dodecahedron at the very center. It's an excavated dodecahedron, but essentially it is a geodesic Buckminster Fuller dome, you could think of, with countless layers going down all the way to the very heart of the proton. In other words, the heart of the very thing at the core of every atom that makes up all matter, all matter, right? And matter is mater, which is mother. So all these ancient traditions worship the divine mother and are in communion with the goddess, who is literally the matter, all creation, everything around you. I mean, if you really want to have a spiritual life, stop going away into the energetic realms and start looking at how sacred the water, the stone, the table, the desk, the ground, the earth, the wind, the trees, the fire, all of this actually is. And I think that's also the lineage of the wisdom tradition of the dragon. It's trying to take you back to how important it is that you breathe air, that you feel warmth of fire, that your blood is the water, that your bones and your tissues are the earth. This is sacred. It's not some false realm that just evaporates when your consciousness leaves it, or you can't wait to get away from it. How beautiful is it that trees flower and that the earth flowers and that things give them life and that we can experience the beauty of this life with pleasure. I mean, honestly, if you weren't incarnated and you weren't here having this conversation right now, well, then what are you doing? You're here, right? So if there is truly a sacredness that you could bring to your life, it would be that return to the sacredness of the five-pointed star, of the pentacle, of the ground, of the earth itself, of the physical world itself. And of course, you're multidimensional. So you're also emotional and mental and interpersonal and akashic and, etc. You've got all of that.
Right. The interesting parts of being in a place like Glastonbury or Sedona or these other sacred spots is the bleed through from these dimensional realities. So these energies are more accessible. So are you going to lead a tour or something in Glastonbury? You're doing your talk, you're doing a post conference.
Yeah. I have planned to do a tour after the conference. But I've got a retreat going on in Ibiza, Spain next month. And my retreat coordinator's been a little focused on us just getting that filled and succeeding at that. So if any of you want to come to Spain with me and explore an amazing experience there next month, please get in touch with me through my website, adamapollo.com. But yes, my plan is to do a retreat there. I really want to do it right, though, and I want to take people to the actual places. I know where Castle Pendragon is. I know where the lake is. I know where some of the sites are that are the secret hidden sites told in mythologies and the history of that time. But I'm still working out a few of the details, and I want to be able to give people a fully comprehensive experience of the actual places, because Glastonbury is magical, and I want to show people where things actually happened.
Yeah, I mean, as you're talking about Glastonbury and Arthur, all the characters, the Merlin character, the being, is that bridge between those other dimensional worlds. I mean, he's known throughout the world as truly a magical being. So what is the tradition of Merlin as it connects to the dragon and the Lady of the Lake and all that? What do you know?
Yeah. What I've been able to assess in my 20 years of looking into this, since I started having memories from that time, is that there is actually there were actually more than one Merlin. There were many Merlins. And
It
that
was like
Merlin was, it was
priesthood.
more, sorry?
Oh no, I was just saying, is it sort of like the name of a priesthood, like Melchizedek, as opposed to a single person? Is that
Yes,
what you're saying?
exactly. More like a title. To be
Right.
the Merlin, to be a Merlin was to be a high magi and a high steward of creation and magic and all of that. So I have my own very personal connection with someone who I believe was a Merlin of that time. And I have met others that I think were Merlins of other times and who carried parts of the story and told parts of the tale and kept things alive through a lot of what was mostly verbal lineage for these peoples, besides the few monks who would write down what they thought was the history of what was happening and what it was supposed to be. And so this is, I think, why there was a gap and then such divergence in the history, because you had the monks who were telling one story that was very political and religious oriented. And then you have the verbal tales that were being passed down and carried by the bards that was telling a very different story. That was the actual poetic experiences of the peoples of those lands in that time.
Right. Well, okay. So, I mean, we've covered a lot of ground. And one thing we didn't really talk about was the quantum field, the connection between the dragon energies and activating the lineages and then connecting to the greater quantum field, which seems to be coming more online for a lot of people, accessing the quantum field. Can you talk about that a
Yeah.
bit?
Well, I mean, what is a magi and what is a Merlin and what is this gift and what does it mean? So, to be in connection with magic and to be a creator and to be part of this creation of reality, one must come to realize that they are connected to reality itself, to matter itself, to the structure of space-time. And through that recognition of connection, one may begin actually having experiences in which they begin to learn the language of that connection. So for a lot of people, that begins with an experience of energy. They feel energy in their hands, they feel energy in their fingertips, they feel energy move and surge through their body. And they realize that the energy inside their bodies or in their hands is also interpermeating and interconnecting with the structure of reality around them. And that in fact, the steering of energy that they do can influence and affect the things around them, because everything else around them is also made of energy and is also exchanging energy. And then one begins to learn the language of that energy. That energy has different qualities. If we're talking about the physical qualities, then we have energy that is expansive, that is heating, and that expanding, heating energy is the energy of fire. And we have energy that is contractive, that condenses, and that cools, and that is the energy of water. And we have energy that spins and churns. It's about torsion and about change and about movement. And that is the energy of the wind and of the breath. And we have energy, of course, that solidifies and integrates, that connects all the information and makes it into form, into solid matter. And that is the energy of earth, to form stones that can remember for thousands of years what has happened to them and every touch that we have given them. And this language of the four elements is known by all the indigenous peoples and all these traditions because it's kind of the foundation level of communion with the physical divine. And then through spirit, which is our perception, our ability to observe, we move up into the emotional spectrum. And the emotional or etheric realm, as some call it, as we would say the gross realm or physical realm, we can talk about the etheric realm as a series of its own elements. But those elements are vibrations, and those vibrations are feelings. When I was a teenager, I learned how to begin translating these in my own language to be able to use those energies for my own self-growth and recognition. And so I call them passion, elation, intention, creation, relation, and ascension. And each of those are a feeling that relate to the elements. Passion being fire, elation actually being the wood element or the liberating life force element, i.e., also the sacral chakra tone. Intention being the air element, the flow of the wind. Creation being the earth element. Relationships being the water element. We share the relation of our drink. We share our chalice together to become one. Our water flows. And our ascension field, which is actually, again, the transcendent. Just like spirit takes us up the pyramid and out of the four elements, ascension takes us up out of the five elements of emotion, as the Taoist alchemy would have it, and into the higher plane, which is the mental plane. And the mental plane is now a sevenfold geometry. And each of the aspects of the mental plane are different processes and systems of form. So I would call them actualization, inspiration, expectation, appreciation, communication, realization, and divination. And each of those sevenfold aspects are, again, elements. Actualization is the forge of the fire of something becoming real. Inspiration is the life force, sexual energy that moves in us and creates all life. Expectation is the wind. You intend enough and you see things change because of your attention, and you begin to expect that your intention actually makes changes. Your heart learns how to appreciate all of creation, and in order to bridge the love inside of you with all things. Your throat learns how to communicate. You learn how to express the connection between all the relationships. Your third eye learns how to realize and have realizations that can open and transform you. And your crown learns how to divine, how to drop into the great divination of the self. And so the solar plexus, this third level, from the root, being your physical, to the sacral, the etheric, to your solar plexus being the mental or the astral plane, is really all a fractal of your whole being. And your mind has just basically developed a way to interact with that fractal of your whole being. And so this is a way that I approach these languages of the unified field, because they also tend to have very direct correlations with processes we see in physics. The five-pointed system makes curvature. Pentagons allow mass and matter to be created. Hexagons are equilibrium. If you follow Nassim Haramein, you see he's talking about everything is hexagonal, triangulated, tetrahedral equilibrium. Well, that's just basically stillness. That's what that is. And emotions flow and are most loud in the stillness. It's how energy is able to move. Energy moves when there's nothing blocking it. So most of space-time is generalized to be this equilibrium structure. And the seven-pointed star of the mind is actually the geometry of what causes spin and torsion and change in the structure of space-time. So now all of a sudden, just by understanding your physical, emotional, and mental bodies, you understand the three basic principles for how everything happens in space-time. Gravity is the 5, electromagnetism, the 6, and the 7 is actually radiation, which is the pushing of the structure of space-time, which is what we see in the electron field. It's where the alpha particle dynamics come into play and all of that. Now, somebody in the chat asked, if matter is God, what is antimatter? Well, look, there's no opposite to God. That's my opinion. That's my perspective. And my experience is that when you're dealing with the infinite eternal of all that is, it always has a balance with itself. Everything has a paradox. Everything has a balance. Always. All the way down, all the way up, everything is balanced. And there's a majesty to that and a perfection to that. And I don't think that, having a good experience and a bad experience is essentially the result of, when you're having a good experience, it's because you're being a good person and God's blessing you. Or you have a bad experience and it's because God's mad at you and is punishing you. I think we do that to ourselves. I think we make those judgments. And that, in fact, if you really look at it, sometimes the bad experiences that people go through, the pain you've had, the challenges you had, the traumatic childhood you had, those things forge you to be a better person. From a lot of the pain and suffering that humanity has gone through, we have grown and evolved. So in a way, there was a reason that those things happened. And I believe in the larger scope, if we really take it in and we really look at it, everything comes back to divine love. All of it. All of it's part of the divine. All of it's God. All of it's okay. All of it is sacred. And I live and breathe that way. And I can tell you, it's made me a much happier, more thriving, healthier person than a
Wow.
lot of people I know who are constantly fighting a judgment and a devil that's inside of them that they hate and they're against, and they're constantly trying to fight, and they're constantly trying to save themselves from this pain of this self-judgment that they have.
Right, that they created themselves based on their own dogmatic traditions. But I mean, I appreciate your going through those three levels of manifestation and interaction. It seems to me, if I can put all that together, what the dragon, the return of the dragon, let's say, is the fact that there's another energy element coming into the field, which could be the free energy, the 0 point activation, which is really, that's how the dragon has combined all those elements into being something that we call mythological, but it's really entering into fifth dimensional electromagnetic anti-gravity, accessing the quantum field technologies that are about to reveal themselves as the dragon breathes its fire and we come into a new form. So that's what I got.
I love that idea, Alan, and I'll agree with you, and I'll just say, I'll say in the way that I agree with you is that I feel that what we're doing right now is some of the deepest real work of reconciling our past.
Yeah.
So the return of the dragon in many ways is the return of the truth of who we are and where we're from and what's life and who are dragons and who the heck are we and what is Avalon really and what are the stories that we've been told about history and Atlantis and all these things. And we're in a real state of essentially people doubting, questioning, and not knowing what the truth is. We are in this beautiful and sometimes very challenging sort of amorphous amoeba of self-discovery, to the point where almost anybody can believe almost anything is true. And it doesn't mean it is. It's just part of their exploration. So you got to try on the flat earth hat. You got to try on the Tartarian gambit. You got to try on these different things because you're seeking to know a deeper truth.
Well, my theory about all that is, and, sort of your show, but the not knowing the truth gives us an abstract realm where we don't collapse the wave function into comprehension, but we activate the multiple possibilities with apprehension. So I'm saying apprehension versus comprehension. When you comprehend something, you measure it, you collapse it, it becomes solid. Apprehension keeps it very fluid and accessing all realms. So let's go to apprehending an aspect of reality, which makes it more malleable, transformable, where there's multiplicities of answers, as opposed to, like, it's quantum computing, gives you probabilities. It doesn't give you boom, that's it. So apprehension or abstract thinking or mythological understanding accesses many more realities, so keeps the wave function fluid, so we can actually think like extraterrestrials. That's my theory.
It's a really fascinating use of language that you're using to get there too, because if you really look at it, the way that most people relate to this term apprehending, often it's apprehensive,
Right.
which is actually nervousness and discomfort, right?
And fear. Yeah.
And fear.
Exactly.
And this is something that we all have to face, right? When we break out of our boxes, it's a little bit apprehensive. You don't know what's coming next. You don't know what's the next part of the story or the next part of the mystery, but we need to have the courage to expand out and to drop the things that we hold as the, like, this is my reality, this is the truth, this has to be the way it is.
Right.
And you know, you got to be able to relax that to actually open up and begin to experience the greater perspective and the greater truths that are very self-evident and do confirm themselves. You know, they do land, and they will continue to land over and over and over and over again until you get the message.
Right. Well, this is great because this is sort of what I'm going to be talking about at Contact in the Desert, about how to
Nice.
think like an ET. Are you going to be at Contact?
I will, of course. Yes,
Oh,
absolutely.
great. Are you going to be in Ibiza before that and then go to?
I am. Yeah, I literally come back from Ibiza like days before. So
I know. I was thinking of going to Ibiza myself because I was invited, and
mm,
maybe I will. But anyway, I'm happy for everything you share. I always learn so much because of your study, and merging your studies with your own personal experience to create these translatable realities that other people can then learn from. So thank you. Someone screamed back there.
that's my Bengal cat. He felt like giving a good shout out to everybody. That's Caspian.
Adam's going to do a great workshop in Glastonbury. I guess your cat wants to come with you.
Clearly, yeah.
And Glastonbury through Portal Ascension. Go to ascensionglastonbury.com. That's September 27th, 29th. Look for me and Adam Apollo at Contact in the Desert, May 30th to June 2nd. Go to Ibiza. Go to adamapollo.com. Adam, always enlightening to be with you. So
thanks so much, Alan. Such a pleasure, and always a great adventure. Thanks so much for having me on the show, Neil, as well, if you're listening in. And I'm really excited to be in Glastonbury with you guys and be uncovering some of these deeper truths and secrets of the dragon lineage and the magic of Avalon.
Oh, it's going to be great to go around Glastonbury with Adam Apollo because, you know, you start to absorb the etheric atmosphere and make new connections. You say, well, look at this here and look. I mean, that's great. So
I have a great time on retreats, especially, and just going to sites, you know, like being able to really feel and interpret the energies and bring forward what's there and call the memories out of the stones and that kind of thing is just one of my favorite things. And for all of the, you know, the hundreds of students out there that know me from being in Egypt or Peru with me or Bolivia with me, usually with either Robert or Nassim or other allies and friends, Alan, you know, is just such a treasure for me in my heart. And so I'm very excited to be leading one of those adventures next month. And I hope that some of you will come and join me in Ibiza because I have a few slots left. So if you're turned on by this whole conversation and fancy yourself becoming a Jedi and guardian of the planet and want to learn the ancient arts of the metaphysics and the way to address a lot of our really, really core challenges and issues that we're facing at this time, it's a great opportunity to come spend some time with me and do it.
Great. You're getting so popular and out there, and you have so much to share. I think you're really helping people. So thank you, Adam.
Thank you, Alan. It's my pleasure and honor.
Look for ascensionglastonbury.com, and we'll see you at all the upcoming events. Thank you, everybody, for watching this new reality station and Portal to Ascension, and subscribe to both and take out a super chat. And we'll see you very, very soon. Talk to you. Bye.